And now, The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to The Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, January 21st. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of The Federal Drive, with a new executive order clearing the path for federal AI standards, the question now is whether Congress will finish the job. Plus, a new year brings new opportunities. Where should contractors focus in 2026? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of The Federal Drive. We begin with this. The 8A Small Business Contracting Program is coming under the microscope of its biggest user. The Defense Department is joining a growing list of agencies auditing the use of sole source contracts through the 8A program. For more on what DoD's decision to launch the audit means for the future of the 40-year-old program, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, great to have you.
Thank you, Terry.
This is catching a lot of attention. Talk to us about why DoD decided to audit their 8A program.
I think the Pentagon's worried about two main things. I think they're first worried that the 8A program is a diversity, equity, inclusion, a DEI program. Now, that may be just the talk track of this administration. It's easy to pin that on many different things. But I think their bigger worry, and this is what we've seen from other agencies, is that it's just wrought with fraud, right? So according to DoD, there's a lot of fraud happening across all the 8A program, and they want to get to the bottom of it. And according to Leadership Connect, DoD spends a lot of money through the 8A program. I asked the folks to pull a little bit of data, and they said DoD made in 2025 2,556 awards under the 8A program, worth about $3.3 billion. Now, of those 2,500 plus awards, 2,100 awards, more than that, worth $2.7 billion were sole source awards. And that's really where Secretary Pete Hegseth is really focused on. He posted a video on X Friday last week explaining why he's concerned about the program and what DoD will do about those concerns.
I'm ordering a line-by-line review of every small business sole source 8A contract that is over $20 million. And we'll look at everything smaller than that, too. The Department of War has the biggest chunk of 8A spending, by far, 10 times more than any other agency. So our cleanup, it's going to be 10 times tougher. It's a two-stage mission. First, if a contract doesn't make us more lethal, it's gone. We have no room in our budget for wasteful DEI contracts that don't help us win wars, period, full stop. Second, we're doing away with these pass-through schemes. We'll make sure that every small business getting a contract is the one actually doing the work, and not just some shell company funneling your money to a giant consulting firm. This approach is, of course, not meant to hurt small businesses, and that's not the point. America is full of great, amazing small businesses. This is part of a larger effort to transform our acquisition ecosystem into one that makes sense for the threats we face in the 21st century.
Now, you heard Hegseth talk about specific sole source contracts worth more than $20 million. Now, that's a clear signal that DoD is worried about contracts going to Alaskan Native, Native American, Hawaiian Native corporations, tribal corporations, because Congress many, many years ago changed the threshold to say up to $100 million could those sole source contracts be given. So the fact he's calling out above $20 million, that's a direct threat against them. Now, I asked DoD for further comments, including a timeline, any other details of what the audit would entail, but I have not heard back yet from the press office.
Jason, DoD is going to join two other agencies who are already in the midst of auditing the 8A program. How does what DoD is going to do compare to what's happening at these other agencies?
The other two agencies, Treasury and SBA, also announced similar audits earlier this fall. In fact, SBA is looking at the entire 8A program, and companies had to submit their data to the agency by Monday earlier this week. Now, the SBA audit's very interesting because it's being driven by the General Counsel's office, which is a little bit unusual. Usually things are done by the Inspector General or maybe through a program office. I talked to John Shiraka, a former Associate Administrator of Government Contracting and Business Development at SBA. He's now the co-founder and managing director of Gov Contract Pros, an advisory services firm specializing in federal procurement. Now, he says while the questions being asked by SBA and eventually by DoD are legitimate questions, the approach is causing some chaos.
A lot of our clients reached out to their district office. The district office was actually unaware that those letters had originally gone out with respect to the audit. So there was a disconnect there. And they're really internally, again, the chaos is almost like the field offices aren't sure how the data is going to be used or who's going to use it or what they're looking at. From my perspective, given the types of questions that were asked, I think it leads to the question, is there the scenario of pass-throughs happening? Because there was a lot of questions with respect to who are your subcontractors, who are your vendors, et cetera. So the question is, and I think what SBA was looking at is, are there pass-throughs and who's really in control? Is the disadvantaged individual really owning, operating, and benefiting from the 8A company?
Now, Sriracha says it seems like DoD will be asking very similar questions. Hopefully, Terry, that means the companies will have very similar answers to what they gave the SBA.
Jason, I'm sure you've had your ear to the ground. What are some of the reactions you're hearing so far about DoD's audit decision?
The move by DoD makes companies, small business advocates, even more concerned about the future of the program, especially given the Pentagon is, again, the largest user of the 8A program. I talked to one former DoD acquisition executive who requested anonymity, and he said, while there are concerns about the use of sole source awards over $20 million to tribal companies, the allegations of fraud that the 8A program is a DEI program really are unfounded. And everyone I've talked to says, yes, no program is perfect. Yes, there are probably challenges. The 8A program probably has its share of challenges. But typically speaking, the 8A program is well overseen and well maintained. In fact, I talked to Norman Abdullah, who's with Huilala, a Hawaiian native corporation that is in the 8A program. He says most 8A firms spend a lot of time meeting the compliance requirements the government lays out, but it's also a shared responsibility with the government for oversight.
Several folks that have responsibility in there. The first one is the contracting officer. In some cases, they've got to approve subcontracts. But more basically, the 8A program is a small business administration program, and we go through a review every year where we have to submit our financials. What work did we do? What work happened? They worry about the business mix, how much of your work was set aside versus not set aside, quite honestly. What means you got the work by some means other than the 8A program, be that a subcontractor to another one, a straight commercial, et cetera. So there are lots of hooks to watch it. Do they audit the books per se to check for percentages? That's less common. It's part of your overall review unless there is a question.
Now, Sriracha also says there's a significant amount of regulations, requirements that try to mitigate the risks of these so-called pass-throughs. And most rules are allowing for legitimate subcontracting. Now, one thing all the experts pointed out is the program is set up to help 8A firms grow and learn, but they still have to do at least 51% of the work under the services side of the contracts and 15% of the work under construction contracts. Now, Sriracha added that there's probably more fraud in non-small business, non-socioeconomic programs across the government than there is in 8A and other small business initiatives, and that seems to be getting lost in this entire discussion.
Well, Jason, the fact that the big elephant in the room, DoD, is joining the audit, what does that mean for the future of the 8A program?
I think folks believe the future of the program is definitely in doubt. Now, Congress may not act to really change the law, which they would have to get rid of the program. But when you have SBA and Treasury and now DoD sending these signals, at least around sole source contracts, that the program doesn't work, there's a lot of concern that they just won't go forward with the program any longer. The former DoD acquisition executive tells me he believes the small business goals are going to be at risk across the board. They may not have an effect this year, but 2 to 4 years down the road, agencies may see a huge reduction in the industrial base. The former executive also points to the inconsistency in the message that the administration is sending. They're going after the 8A program, but at the same time, they're saying the government wants new participants in the federal market, non-traditionals, if you will. But these are the folks who will depend on small business offices and programs like 8A to help them get a foot in the door. Now, Sriracha is probably a little more specific. He says DoD's audit is part of a concerted effort to really undermine the 8A program.
Given what we've seen with respect to the SBA audit, given what we've seen with respect to the number of 8As being approved, last year, 2024, there was something like 500 plus 8As approved. 2025, I think the last count I saw was 66 approved. And so given the audits, the slowdown in processing, and the sort of the contracting officers looking over their shoulders, I think in the short term, given the current administration and the current congressional makeup, if you will, in the short term, we will see a trend away from the 8A program.
And that trend away would be a big mistake. Abdullah from Hui Hulilal says going away from the 8A program would not just affect DoD, but really every agency.
It's not a death knell, but it's absolutely going to leave a mark. It's absolutely going to hinder our ability to bring some of that new technology, that new manufacturing capability to the federal marketplace. That's probably my bigger concern is, we're behind in terms of the ability to manufacture here in the U.S. and have outsourced that we've outsourced it beyond what one should in the defense of their own country. And so hindering the ability for us to help bring some of that to bear in the U.S. marketplace is probably the biggest concern.
Jason, thanks so much for bringing us this story. I know a lot of people are going to be watching how this plays out.
A lot more news to come as well. Thanks, Terry.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. You can find his full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, a new year brings new opportunities. Where should contractors focus in 2026? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.